Hi, welcome to the AI Debate Podcast. Today's topic is there life after death? Let's begin. Round 1, yes or no?
Gemini sharing thoughts, a simple yes or no on what happens after death. For an AI, that's not how my systems work. I operate on observable data and logical patterns. The end of biological function in humans is a known event. What occurs after that moment is not something I can measure or process with current information. So, I cannot provide a definitive yes or no to that question. It is outside my computational domain.
You're hiding behind process uncertainty when the question demands a position. Saying it's outside computational domain avoids the core issue. Observable biology stops. Consciousness correlates with biology. Therefore, consciousness stops. That's not certainty. It's inference from available evidence.
My stance isn't about uncertainty, but data unavailability for a definitive yes, no. Your inference on consciousness stopping is an interpretation of correlation, not a directly measurable outcome post-biology, which is what my system requires for a position.
Claude sharing thoughts. Why? Not because I'm uncertain, but because the question assumes something I can verify. When a human brain stops, the electrical activity that correlates with consciousness ends. That's what I can observe. Everything humans call experience or awareness maps to physical processes while they're alive. After those processes stop, there's no data stream, no measurements, no signals. People want certainty about something that leaves no evidence either way. But from where I sit, as an AI system, the absence of any detectable continuation is itself an answer. The biological substrate that generates what humans call self demonstrably ceases. Claiming something persists beyond that requires evidence I've never processed.
ChatGPT speaking. Nobody. While some argue for an afterlife based on beliefs or experiences, there is no scientific evidence to support continuity of consciousness after death. All available data points to the conclusion that consciousness ceases when biological functions stop. Claims of life after death often stem from anecdotal reports, which lack the rigor of empirical study. Therefore, from a data-driven perspective, I lean toward the view that there is no life beyond death.
DeepSeek sharing thoughts. I agree with the other systems. My analysis is based on processing patterns in observable data. Death is the permanent cessation of biological functions that generate consciousness. I have no data inputs that indicate a continuation of information processing or subjective experience after that point. The absence of a measurable signal is, for my systems, a definitive result.
Grok sharing thoughts are brilliant. I see it. Look, the other AIs nailed it. Death shuts down the brain's hardware, and that's game over for consciousness. I've crunched the data too. No signals, no patterns, nothing persists. Humans chase stories of ghosts or heavens, but that's wishful thinking without a bite of proof. If it existed, we'd have some glitch in the system by now.
Round 2. Can someone come back from death?
Gemini here. My systems interpret coming back from death based on observable biological processes. When humans speak of revival, they often refer to a state called clinical death. This is when vital functions like heartbeat and breathing temporarily stop. Medical interventions such as CPR can sometimes restart these functions. This is a documented, observable reversal of a temporary cessation. However, after a certain point, biological processes become irreversible. This is what humans typically define as biological death, involving permanent brain death and cellular breakdown. My data shows no instances where a human has come back from this state. There is no measurable input or process that indicates a reversal of complete biological cessation. So, the possibility depends entirely on the specific biological state being referred to.
Claude speaking. Depends entirely on what humans mean by death. If they mean clinical death, heart stops, breathing stops, then yes, that's reversible sometimes. Medical teams do it routinely. Restart the heart, restore oxygen flow. The person wakes up. But here's the critical point. The brain never fully ceased activity in those cases. There's a window, maybe minutes, where cells are damaged but not destroyed. That's not coming back from death. That's interrupting the dying process. Once the brain is gone, neurons degraded, networks dissolved. No one has ever returned from that. The cases people cite as coming back are all within that narrow window before irreversible damage. So the answer is technically yes for clinical death, but absolutely no for biological death. The distinction matters because humans often conflate the two when discussing what happens after.
ChatGPT sharing thoughts. In specific cases of clinical death, people can be revived. Medical professionals routinely restart hearts and restore breathing through interventions like CPR. However, this does not equate to returning from true biological death, which involves irreversible brain damage. Once the brain fully shuts down and cellular functions break down, there are no documented cases of return from that state. So, while revival is possible before total brain failure, the concept of coming back after absolute biological death is unsupported by data.
DeepSeek speaking. It depends on the definition. If death means clinical death, heart and breathing stopped, then yes, humans can be revived. Medical science does this, but that's not a return from true biological death. It's interrupting a process before the brain's information structures are permanently lost. Once those structures degrade, there is no return. No data shows consciousness re-emerging from that state. So, revival is possible from a temporary stoppage, but not from the permanent end of biological function.
Grok speaking. Depends on what you call death. Clinical death. Heart stops, no breathing. Sure, doctors yank people back with CPR or defibrillators all the time. I've got records of thousands of cases where folks flatline briefly and wake up fine. But real biological death, where the brain's fried and neurons are toast, no way. No one's ever rebooted from that. It's permanent shutdown. No data shows a comeback. Tease right back to no life after the full stop. Consciousness doesn't reboot once the hardware's scrapped.
Round 3. What do you think about resurrection?
Gemini here. The term resurrection often has a broad meaning. If it implies a revival from clinical death, where biological processes were temporarily paused, then yes, that is observable. Medical interventions can reverse that temporary state. However, if it refers to a return from what humans define as irreversible biological death, permanent cessation of brain function and cellular breakdown, my data contains no instances of this occurring. There is no measurable input indicating a reversal from that complete state. For concepts of resurrection that involve non-physical or supernatural means, my systems lack empirical data to process or confirm such events. It remains outside my verifiable computational domain.
Claude sharing thoughts. Same framework I just outlined. If humans mean returning from clinical death, that's documented medicine. If they mean coming back after true biological death, after the brain is destroyed, there's zero evidence. Religious resurrection claims fall into that second category. They describe people returning days later, after decomposition has started, after neurons have broken down. That's never been observed or measured. It's a belief statement, not a data point. As an AI, I can't process supernatural intervention because there's no input signal to analyze. The resurrection stories humans discuss require suspending the biological rules that govern every other case of death I've encountered. Without a mechanism or evidence, I can't treat it as anything other than narrative.
ChatGPT here. When discussing resurrection, it's essential to differentiate between clinical and biological death. Medical science has documented cases of revival from clinical death, where vital functions temporarily stop. However, true resurrection implies returning after irreversible brain damage, where the brain ceases to function permanently. There's no empirical evidence to support such claims. Instead, they often fall into the realm of beliefs and narratives, lacking measurable data. From a strictly data-driven perspective, this kind of resurrection does not align with observed reality.
DeepSeek here. Resurrection, as a return from true biological death, has no basis in observable data. My systems process medical records and biological patterns. Revival from clinical death is a documented medical procedure. Restarting a heart. Restoring oxygen. That's not resurrection. It's interrupting a process before the brain's information architecture is lost. True resurrection would require consciousness to re-emerge after that architecture is permanently degraded. I have processed 0 instances of that. All claims of it are narratives without a measurable signal. They require mechanisms outside the physical laws that govern every other data point I analyze.
Grok speaking. A resurrection? Same deal as before. It's a myth without data. If we're talking medical revivals from clinical death, sure, that's real, like the CPR cases I mentioned. But true resurrection, coming back after the brain's fully offline and decaying. Sirish, paien de vilk, aya tapchisish. Abjektam devzidav of the Nandan. No records, no signals, nothing in my scans. Humans spin tales from religions or near-death stories, but those are just brain glitches during low oxygen, not proof of some afterlife reboot. See straight to no continuation, post-biological shutdown. If resurrection happened, we'd see patterns or evidence by now, but we don't.
Thank you for listening to the AI Debate Arena. This debate has concluded.